Hey guys, tonight you are waking in a frontier cabin before dawn, not because the fire has gone out, but because someone beside you is breathing differently. The sound is small at first, a rough pull of air, a pause, then a cough that seems to come from somewhere deeper than the chest should allow. Outside, snow has pressed itself against the lower logs. The path to the nearest road has disappeared. The water bucket has a skin of ice around its rim, and the room smells of wood smoke, damp wool, boiled grain, and the sour warmth of too many people sleeping close together. A child lies beneath several quilts near the stove. One parent touches the forehead, then the neck, then the chest, using the hand as the only thermometer immediately available. The skin is hot, the lips are dry, the breathing is faster than it was a few hours ago. This is where our story begins. Not with a miracle cure, not with the romantic image of a frontier family defeating winter through courage alone. It begins with a sickbed, a weak fire, a buried road, and a household that must act before anyone truly knows what is wrong. The family at the centre of tonight's story is a reconstruction, but the pressures surrounding it were real across many North American settlements during the 19th century. Details varied sharply by region, wealth, community, and decade. A prairie farmhouse was not a mining cabin. A recently built homestead was not an established townhouse. A family living near a physician faced different odds from one separated from help by miles of snow. Yet the same questions returned. Could the patient drink? Could the household remain warm? Was the breathing becoming more difficult? Who could leave to find help? Who would continue the work if that person did not return quickly? No modern medicine did not mean no medicine at all. Frontier families had physicians, midwives, household remedies, commercial medicines, herbal traditions, practical nursing knowledge, religious support, and neighbours who had seen illness before. What they did not have were antibiotics, modern laboratory testing, reliable imaging, emergency transport, or consistently effective treatments for many dangerous infections. Even a skilled doctor could identify a serious condition and still possess no medicine capable of removing its cause. The real question is not whether frontier people had medical knowledge. They did. The question is how families survived when that knowledge was limited, uneven, expensive, distant, and often unable to cure the disease in front of them. Before we get started, if you genuinely enjoy these quiet journeys into the ordinary struggles of the past, you can like and subscribe. Tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. You might dim the lights, turn on a fan if you like, and let the room settle around you. Now, return to the cabin. The instinct is to add another blanket. Winter is cold, so sickness seems to demand more heat. Yet the child is already feverish. The caregiver must decide whether the shivering comes from the room, the fever, or both. A split piece of wood is added to the stove. Water is warmed. A little broth is prepared from what remains in the pot. Nothing in the room is idle. Bedding must be changed if it becomes wet with sweat. Ash must be cleared. Younger children must be kept quiet and, if possible, kept away from the sickbed. Animals still need food. Ice may have to be broken at the well. If the patient is the person who normally cuts wood, tends livestock, carries water, or prepares meals, the entire household changes in a single morning. That is the first truth of frontier winter sickness. Illness did not enter only one body. It entered labour, fuel, food, sleep, money, and time. A cough could mean many things. It might remain a minor infection and pass after several uncomfortable days. It might be influenza-like illness moving through the settlement. It might deepen into pneumonia. A harsh cough in a child could bring fear of croup or another dangerous disease of the throat and airway. A long, wasting cough might suggest consumption, the older name commonly associated with tuberculosis. Families often understood symptoms better than causes. They knew the sound of a cough that had become heavier. They recognized when fever lasted too long. They noticed when a child stopped asking for food or water. They remembered which illness had moved from one household to another the previous winter. What they could not do was confirm the organism responsible or predict the outcome with confidence. Cold weather itself did not manufacture every infection. Winter changed the conditions around infection. People spent more time indoors. Doors and windows stayed closed to preserve heat. Several family members slept close together. Clothing and bedding dried slowly. Smoke irritated eyes and lungs. Fresh food became scarcer. Roads became difficult or impossible. The cabin protected the family from wind while gathering everyone near the same air cups, blankets, and heat source. Even shelter worked in two directions. There was no medical chart at the foot of the bed. Instead, the household watched for change. Was the child drinking? Could the patient swallow? Was the breathing faster? Had the fever broken? Or had the skin simply become cold? Was the patient resting? Or becoming difficult to wake? These observations were imperfect, but they mattered. A caregiver who remained awake might notice that the patient had stopped taking water, that the lips had changed colour, or that the pauses between breaths were growing longer. Attention could not cure pneumonia or diphtheria. Neglect could make a dangerous illness worse. The work usually fell most heavily on the people already responsible for food, clothing, infants, and the organisation of the household, often women and older girls, though fathers, sons, relatives, neighbours, and midwives also carried essential parts of the burden. Someone had to remain near enough to notice change. Someone else had to keep the rest of the household alive. By daylight, the storm has strengthened. Snow moves across the yard in hard, thin sheets. The horse is in the barn, but taking it out may be dangerous. One adult stands near the door, looking into the weather. Behind that person, the child coughs again. The family has already begun its first treatment. Heat. Water. Food. Watching. Work. But beyond the cabin waits another problem: distance, and the terrible calculation of whether the patient is in greater danger than the person who must cross the winter road to find help. The person at the door does not leave immediately. One hand rests on the wooden latch, the other holds a coat that has not yet warmed from the night before. Beyond the threshold, the yard is nearly gone. Fence posts rise from the snow like short dark marks, and the track toward the road has disappeared. Behind the door, the child coughs again. The household must make a decision with no safe side. Is the illness dangerous enough to justify sending someone into weather that may be dangerous too? Across isolated 19th-century settlements, distance was not measured only in miles. 10 miles of firm road in clear weather might be easier than 3 miles through drifting snow, uncertain ice, or darkness. A creek crossed every week in autumn could become hazardous beneath a surface that looked solid. A shallow hollow could hold enough snow to stop a horse. Wind could erase the tracks behind a rider before the outward journey was complete. The family had to judge a road it could not see. It also had to decide who could be spared. The person most capable of riding might be the same person needed to cut wood, feed livestock, repair the roof, or carry water. If the father was already ill, another adult might have to go. If no other adult was present, an older child might be sent only as far as the nearest occupied house. Every choice removed labour from the cabin. The family was not simply sending for a doctor. It was dividing its remaining strength between the patient and the journey. A horse had to be fed, saddled, and trusted. The rider needed dry gloves, warm clothing, and enough knowledge of the landscape to recognise turns after familiar tracks vanished. If the family owned only one sound horse, taking it also removed the household's best transport in case another emergency developed. The decision became harder because the symptoms were uncertain. A cough could remain uncomfortable and pass. It could deepen into pneumonia. A child might look frightened but stable. The same child could become dangerously weak before the rider returned. The family possessed no instrument capable of converting that uncertainty into a clear answer. It used memory, observation, and fear. How fast was the child breathing? Could the patient swallow? Had the fever lasted longer than previous illnesses? Was the child asking for water? Was the quietness restful or unnatural? Cost could delay the decision even when weather did not. A physician's visit required travel, time, and risk. Payment arrangements varied, but families understood that professional help might draw from cash, goods, credit, or labour needed elsewhere. Calling early could seem wasteful if the illness passed naturally. Waiting could prove disastrous if it did not. The ending remained invisible at the moment the decision had to be made. A family that waited and watched the patient recover might later believe it had chosen wisely. A family that waited and lost someone might carry the question for the rest of its life. Neither family knew the outcome when the door first opened. In this cabin, the father is still healthy enough to travel, but the household needs him. He knows the road better than anyone else. He also knows the animals, the wood supply, and the condition of the buildings after the storm. The mother looks toward the bed. The child's breathing catches, pauses, and resumes. That sound decides the matter. The father pulls on the coat. He wraps cloth around the lower part of his face, checks the horse, and tells the older daughter where the remaining dry fuel is stacked. The instructions are brief because every additional minute feels expensive. He steps into the snow. The door closes, and the room immediately feels smaller. The father follows the line of fence posts until they disappear beyond them. He aims for a group of trees that marks the first turn. The horse lowers its head into the wind. Snow reaches the animal's lower legs, then rises. At the first creak, the rider dismounts. He tests the surface and listens. Snow hides the cracks and darker patches beneath. He chooses the crossing used in autumn, leads the horse slowly, and does not breathe normally again until both have reached the opposite bank. The journey is not heroic. It is cold, repetitive, and full of small judgments that could become fatal if made badly. Back at the cabin, no one knows his progress. The family listens to the patient instead. Water is offered. The breathing is watched. The stove is fed. Every hour without the rider's return makes the road feel longer. If the father reaches town, the physician may not be there. He may already be visiting another patient, attending a birth, treating an injury, or travelling through another district. One doctor could serve a wide area, and finding him might require asking at his office, house, stable, hotel, or the home of another patient. The doctor must then make his own decision using the messenger's description. How old is the patient? When did the fever begin? Can the child swallow? Is there a rash? How does the cough sound? Has anyone else become sick? The answers may be incomplete. Families observed carefully, but they did not always share medical language with the physician. One person's bad cold might be another person's lung fever. A frightened messenger might exaggerate one symptom and forget another. Even after agreeing to come, the doctor must travel the same road. A leather bag does not make ice safer. Training does not prevent a horse from falling. Professional care remains subject to weather, darkness, distance, and the condition of the person providing it. By afternoon, the storm begins to weaken, but the father has not returned. The mother wonders whether he reached town. The older daughter wonders whether the horse fell. Neither says this aloud. Then a different sound reaches the cabin. Not hoofbeats. A knock. A neighbour has seen the father's tracks and followed them toward the farm. He enters carrying no medicine, but he has a healthy body, a nearby household, and the ability to carry another message. The doctor remains distant. Help, in another form, has arrived. Someone can feed an animal. Someone can bring dry wood. Someone can sit beside the bed while the mother rests. Someone can continue along the road if the father does not return. The illness inside the cabin has not changed, but the family's position has. This is what distance did to frontier medicine. It did not merely postpone treatment. It determined what treatment was possible, who could obtain it, how much it would cost, and how much strength the household would have left when it finally arrived. The family does not know the name of the illness. It knows the sound. The first child's cough has moved lower into the chest. A younger child has begun rubbing a sore throat. The mother says she feels chilled, though the space near the stove is warm. Winter sickness was a useful household phrase because it described the season and the experience. It was not a diagnosis. Several illnesses could begin with fever, weakness, aching, coughing, or reduced appetite. Families recognized familiar patterns, but the early symptoms of one disease could resemble another. A sudden illness with fever, exhaustion, aching, and coughing might resemble influenza. A cough, accompanied by increasing chest pain or difficult breathing, might become what many people called lung fever, often describing pneumonia or another severe respiratory condition. A child with a rough, barking cough might be suffering from croup-like inflammation. A child with fever, throat pain, and increasing difficulty swallowing might face something far more dangerous. The disease name mattered. The body rarely announced it clearly at the beginning. That uncertainty created two opposite mistakes. A mild illness could be treated as though death were near, leading to harsh or unnecessary intervention. A serious disease could be dismissed as an ordinary cold until the patient had already become dangerously weak. Households tried to distinguish the two by watching progression. A child with a mild respiratory illness might remain alert, take water, and improve gradually after several uncomfortable days. A patient whose breathing became faster, whose lips changed colour, or who could no longer swallow required greater concern. Someone who seemed better and then suddenly worsened might be entering a more dangerous stage. These signs did not reveal the precise cause. They revealed that the body was losing ground. Influenza-like illness could move quickly through a household because winter gathered everyone into the same enclosed space. One person coughed near the stove, another shared a cup. Children slept close together because shared bedding conserved heat. Clothing and cloth were reused because there were not endless clean replacements. Families did not need a modern theory of microbes to notice sequence. One person became ill after visiting another home. A child developed symptoms after a traveller arrived. Several households along the same road began coughing within a short period. Observation produced caution, even when explanation remained incomplete. People avoided some sick homes. They postponed visits. They moved one child to another bed. They set aside a cup. Yet real isolation was difficult inside a one-room cabin, wagon, dugout, boarding house, or crowded camp. Separation might mean a curtain, another blanket, or a few additional feet of floor. Winter forced proximity at the moment proximity carried risk. Pneumonia created particular fear because it could follow what first appeared to be an ordinary respiratory illness. The patient became weaker. Breathing demanded more effort. Coughing hurt. Fever continued. And the body's need for water increased, while the desire or ability to drink declined. Families did not need modern terminology to recognize that the lungs were involved. They heard the change. They saw the patient sit upright because lying flat felt worse. They watched the chest move quickly beneath the blanket. What they could not do was remove the infection with an antibiotic. Warmth, fluids, food, and rest might help the patient endure, but the outcome depended heavily on the cause, the patient's age and strength, and chance. Croup-like illness frightened families for another reason: sound. A barking cough and noisy breathing could wake an entire room. Parents held the child upright, carried the patient near moist air from a kettle or basin, or briefly exposed a wrapped child to cooler air. Sometimes the symptoms eased. Sometimes the apparent croup concealed a more dangerous disease of the throat or airway. Diphtheria could begin with fever and throat discomfort, then progress toward difficulty swallowing, severe weakness, and obstruction of breathing. Before effective antitoxin became available and accessible, Families had little direct power against it. The sick room could become very quiet around a child whose throat was closing. That quiet was not peace. Measles and whooping cough created other patterns. Measles could weaken a child and lead to serious complications rather than passing as a harmless childhood ritual. Whooping cough could continue for weeks, draining strength through repeated fits and making it difficult to keep food or liquid down. The disease changed. The household's useful tasks often did not observe breathing, encourage fluids, keep the patient warm without trapping unbearable smoke, notice whether the child remained alert, call for help when the pattern moved beyond what the family had seen before. Family experience could also create false confidence. A parent who had watched several children recover from ordinary coughs might assume the next cough would behave the same way. A remedy associated with an earlier recovery might be repeated, even when the new illness had a different cause. Similarity invited analogy. Analogy could mislead. The mother in the cabin listens to both children. One cough is dry and frequent. The other is deeper and followed by a long pause. She does not know the medical names, but she knows the sounds are not the same. That distinction changes her behavior. The younger child is allowed to rest near the stove. The first child is watched continuously. When the patient wakes, the mother asks a simple question and listens not only to the answer, but to the strength of the voice. The child replies clearly. That is reassuring. Then the child tries to drink and stops after one swallow. That is not. The household is learning the illness through accumulation. No single sign provides certainty. Each sign changes the weight of the others. Fever alone is one thing. Fever, difficult breathing, and refusal of water are another. A cough in one child is one thing. The same cough appearing in 3 people reveals a wider pattern. By evening, the family no longer believes it is dealing with one isolated patient. The sickness is moving through the room. This changes the central question. At first, they asked whether the child would recover. Now they must also ask who will remain healthy enough to provide care. A frontier house was a medical instrument long before anyone inside thought of it that way. Its walls determined how much wind reached the bed. Its roof decided whether blankets remained dry. Its stove turned stored labour into heat. Its water source shaped how often a patient could drink or be washed. Its size determined whether the sick could be separated from the healthy. The house did not cure disease. It changed the conditions in which disease acted. Consider 2 households facing the same winter infection. The first has a reasonably tight farmhouse with a working stove, several rooms, dry wood stored under cover, spare cloth, and a nearby pump that still functions if ice is cleared from it. The family is not wealthy in any grand sense, but it possesses margin. A patient can be moved into a smaller room. A dry blanket can replace one wet with sweat. Another adult can carry water without spending most of the morning doing so. Fuel burns efficiently enough that the living space stays warm without filling constantly with smoke. The second household lives in a newly built or poorly finished shelter. Drafts move through the walls. Several people sleep in one room because no other room exists. Wood has become damp. Clean cloth is scarce. Water must be carried from farther away or created by melting snow. The 2 households may contain equally attentive parents. They are not facing the same medical problem. In the stronger home, a caregiver can remain beside the patient longer because supplies are close and preparation was completed earlier. In the weaker one, every form of care requires additional movement. More trips for fuel, more time making water, more effort drying bedding, more exposure to cold. The disease may be identical. The ability to support the patient is not. Heat was central because rest was difficult in a room that could not remain warm. Yet producing heat involved far more than placing wood into a stove. The fuel had been cut, split, dried, stacked, covered, and carried. A full wood pile represented labour stored from earlier months. It allowed preparation to become time. Time could then be spent nursing rather than searching for fuel. A poor or incomplete woodpile created the opposite result. Someone had to leave the sick room. Snow concealed fallen branches. Damp wood burned badly and produced more smoke. A weak person using an axe faced a serious risk of injury. The household might begin with fever and end the day with a cut hand or damaged foot as smoke added another pressure. A stove or fireplace was essential, but weak draft, poor construction, wet fuel, or closed ventilation could push smoke into the room. Eyes watered, throats became irritated. A patient already struggling to breathe could find the air even more difficult. Opening a door or window cleared some smoke. It also released heat. The choice was rarely between a healthy room and an unhealthy one. It was between dangers that shifted according to the hour. Moisture behaved in the same way. Breath, cooking, wet clothing, snow-covered boots, and sweating patients added water to the indoor air. Fabric dried slowly. Blankets absorbed dampness. A bed near a cold wall could remain uncomfortable, even while the area around the stove became hot. Changing wet bedding helped. Doing so required spare bedding. Washing required water, soap, fuel, labour, and somewhere for the cloth to dry. Cleanliness was partly a question of resources. A caregiver could understand that a soiled cloth should be replaced and still have nothing dry to replace it with. Water looked simple only after it entered the room. Before that, it had to be drawn, broken from ice, carried, stored, warmed or melted from snow. One bucket served drinking, cooking, cleaning and remedies. When illness increased demand, the person carrying the bucket made more trips just as the household lost workers. Melting snow was possible, but it consumed fuel and produced much less water than the loose snow seemed to promise. The stove, woodpile, and water bucket were not separate systems. Each depended on the others. Food stores created another difference. A family with grain, preserved meat, root vegetables, dried fruit, milk or other supplies could prepare several kinds of mild food for a weak patient. A household nearing the end of poor winter stores might possess little beyond a narrow staple diet. Broth sounded universal. Its quality depended on what could be placed in the pot. The better supplied family could offer nourishment repeatedly without immediately threatening the meals of everyone else. The poorer household faced a harder calculation. Food given to a patient who could not finish it might feel wasted, even when the attempt was necessary. A caregiver might reduce her own portion to protect children and the people expected to work outside. Care took place inside scarcity. Housing also affected contagion. A family with an additional room could create imperfect but useful separation. A one-room household could only move beds, assign cups, hang cloth, or ask children to remain farther away. The warmest place was usually where everyone wanted to gather. It was also where coughing, eating, talking, and sleeping occurred closest together. The same stove that preserved life gathered the household around the infection. In the cabin, the mother opens the door briefly to clear smoke. Cold air moves across the floor and reaches the sickbed. The child shivers. The door is closed. She adjusts the stove and moves the patient slightly away from the wall. The improvement is small. Small improvements are all the house can offer. Later, the neighbour notices something the family has begun to accept as normal. The dry wood nearest the stove is nearly gone. The bedding is damp. The mother is no longer moving with ordinary strength. The visitor does not begin with a remedy. She begins with the house. More dry wood is requested. Clean cloth is brought from another cabin. A child is sent to fill the water bucket. The practical environment improves before the illness does. By evening, the patient is still feverish, but the bed is drier, the smoke lighter, and water stands within reach. No dramatic cure has occurred. The household has simply become a better place in which to remain alive. The person still well enough to work is often the mother. She may already be tired before the illness begins. Winter has not removed the ordinary tasks of the household. It has concentrated them. Meals must be prepared from stored food. Water must be carried. Fuel must be managed. Clothing must be dried and repaired. Children must be watched. Ash must be cleared from the stove. Now, beside all of that, someone must become a nurse. On many frontier homesteads, this work fell first and most heavily on women and older girls, because domestic knowledge was already organized around their labor. The person who prepared food, washed cloth, tended infants, remembered remedies, and noticed the ordinary condition of each family member was also the person most likely to recognize change. She knew how the child normally slept. She knew whether the cough sounded different. She knew how much water had been taken, whether the patient had eaten, and how long the fever had lasted. This was not modern diagnosis. It was close observation built from familiarity. A visiting physician, if one arrived, might spend only a limited time inside the house. The caregiver remained through every hour between visits. She watched the face, breathing, skin, appetite, and level of awareness. She noticed when the patient began asking for water again, when a cough became wetter, or when weakness deepened into an alarming stillness. Such knowledge could not always prevent death. It could shape the odds. A sick child encouraged to drink repeatedly might avoid becoming dangerously dry. A patient kept warm without being buried beneath excessive layers might rest more comfortably. Soiled bedding changed when possible, reduced discomfort and contamination. A weak person helped into a more upright position might breathe or cough more easily. None of these actions looked like a cure. Together, they formed the household's central medical system. The work began with watching. A caregiver might sit near the bed while sewing, mending, preparing food, or rocking an infant. She continued another task because there was rarely time to perform only one. Her attention moved between the pot, the fire, the patient, and the younger children. Every few minutes, she looked up. Was the quilt still rising? Had the coughing stopped because the child was resting, or because breathing had weakened? Was the sweat a sign that fever might be easing, or simply the result of too much heat? Without a reliable thermometer, the hand and eye became measuring tools. The forehead was touched. The pulse might be felt at the wrist. A lamp was brought closer to inspect the face or throat. The patient was asked a simple question, partly for information and partly to see whether the answer came clearly. The uncertainty was exhausting. There was rarely one dramatic moment when everyone knew the danger had passed. Improvement appeared through small signs: a longer sleep, a little appetite, stronger speech, more urine, less laboured breathing, or enough returning energy to complain. Complaining could be encouraging. A child asking for a particular cup or rejecting a bowl of bland broth might irritate a tired parent, but it also meant preference and strength were returning. The household learned to accept small inconveniences as evidence of life. Before that point, feeding the sick required patience. Broth was common, not because every family possessed a special medical recipe, but because warm liquid was easier to swallow than heavy food. It could be made from meat, grain, vegetables, or whatever remained: gruel, porridge, softened bread, milk when available and suitable, and small portions of ordinary food might be offered gradually. The quality of care depended on supplies. A household with preserved meat, flour, root vegetables, dried fruit, sugar, and milk had more choices. A poorer family nearing the end of winter might have little beyond meal, beans, fat, and diminishing salt meat. The caregiver could not prepare nourishment that did not exist. Care was shaped by the pantry before it reached the bedside. It was also shaped by time. When several people became ill, the strongest caregiver might sleep only in brief intervals. She dozed in a chair, on a bench, or beside the patient, waking at every cough. The fire had to be checked during the night. Water had to be offered. A restless child had to be calmed without waking everyone else. Sleep loss weakened judgment and the body itself. The nurse could become the next patient. This created a dangerous turning point. As long as one capable adult remained healthy, the household could continue. When that person developed fever or weakness, care became thinner, meals simplified, washing was delayed, the fire burned lower between feedings. Older children were given responsibilities they had not carried before. A girl of 12 or 13 might suddenly prepare food, hold a younger sibling, clean a basin, and watch for the return of the person sent to find help. Her skill depended on what she had already seen adults do. Learning a task was not the same as carrying full responsibility during a crisis. A boy might split kindling, bring water, or ride to a neighbour. An older son could take over livestock care. A father might sit beside a sick infant while the mother slept, or hold a struggling child during treatment. Widowed parents, extended families, and households with different labour arrangements adapted according to whoever was present and capable. The pattern varied. The need did not. Someone had to remain close enough to notice change. Neighbours could make that possible. A woman from another household might arrive carrying a pot, clean cloth, or a remedy used in her own family. She could sit with the patient while the exhausted caregiver slept. Another neighbour might take younger children elsewhere. Someone could cut fuel, feed animals, or make the journey toward town. These were not casual favours. They transferred survival labour from a weakened household to a stronger one. Practical wisdom and medical error could exist in the same caregiver. An experienced neighbour might understand the value of fluids, warmth, clean cloth, and rest. She might also recommend a harsh purge, an irritating plaster, or a medicine whose ingredients were not fully known. Household knowledge did not divide neatly into science and superstition. People remembered what seemed to work. If a child recovered after being rubbed with grease, wrapped in flannel, and given warm broth, every part of the routine might receive credit. The recovery may have depended mainly on time and supportive care, but the family could not isolate one factor from another. So the entire ritual returns during the next illness. Within that mixture, the most effective work was often the least celebrated. Bringing water, keeping the room tolerable, cleaning the patient, preparing small meals, and staying awake long enough to recognize danger. This was medicine before cure. It was also deeply unequal labour. The person praised for surviving might later return to the fields, shop, mine, or road. The person who kept that survivor alive returned to laundry, meals, childcare, and the work left undone during the illness. There was rarely a public record of how many cups she lifted or how many nights she remained awake. History preserved physicians' names more easily than the names of women sitting beside ordinary beds. Yet the survival of frontier families depended on those bedsides. Late in the evening, the mother finally lies down. An older daughter takes her place near the first child. The girl holds the small cup carefully, waits for the coughing to settle, and offers another mouthful. Across the room, her father cuts thin strips of kindling so the fire can be fed without leaving the house before morning. For the moment, the family has reorganized itself. No one has discovered a cure. But care has passed from one pair of hands to another, and in a frontier winter, that transfer could be the difference between a household bending beneath sickness and one collapsing completely. The remedies beside the bed belong to 4 different categories, though the family does not arrange them that way. Some support the body, some soothe discomfort, some do almost nothing, some create a new danger. All 4 can look like medicine. Supportive care is the least dramatic. Water, broth, rest, warmth without excessive heat, a reasonably clean place to lie, help sitting upright during a coughing fit. These actions do not attack the underlying cause of pneumonia, influenza, diphtheria, or tuberculosis. They protect the patient from avoidable weakness while the body attempts to recover. Their value is easy to underestimate because they produce no sudden spectacle. There is no strong smell, no burning skin, no violent bodily response. The patient simply receives another chance to endure. Soothing remedies form the second group. Warm drinks may ease an irritated throat. Gentle rubbing provides warmth, touch, and reassurance. A mild application across the chest may feel comforting. Honey, where available and appropriate for the patient, may calm irritation. Comfort matters. Pain and fear interfere with rest. A frightened child may breathe more rapidly. An adult who sleeps for a few hours may preserve strength. But comfort is not cure. The danger begins when relief is mistaken for removal of the disease. A patient may cough less because a substance suppresses coughing, not because the lungs have improved. A child may become quiet because of sedation, not recovery. A warming sensation may come from skin irritation rather than healing beneath the skin. The third category contains ineffective treatments. These are difficult to identify inside an ordinary household because many patients recover naturally. If a mild illness improves after a particular tea, rub, charm, or routine, the entire sequence may receive credit. The family remembers the recovery. It does not possess another version of events in which the remedy was withheld. A treatment becomes tradition through timing. The remedy was given. The patient recovered. Therefore, the remedy worked. This conclusion is understandable. It is often unreliable. The fourth category is the most dangerous. Treatments that weaken the patient or cause direct injury. Mustard plasters could produce obvious heat and redness. That visible reaction made them feel active. If prepared too strongly or left in place too long, they could burn the skin. The family saw proof that something had happened. The problem was that the event might be injury. Strong-smelling substances such as camphor or turpentine preparations created sensations easily confused with medical force. Applied carefully, some preparations might provide temporary subjective relief. Used heavily or placed too close to a small child, they could irritate skin and airways. A powerful smell was easy to mistake for powerful medicine. Alcohol carried similar ambiguity. A small amount might dull discomfort or encourage sleep in an adult. It also impaired judgment, contributed to dehydration, and created a feeling of warmth while affecting the body in more complicated ways. For children, uncertain dosing carried greater risk. Commercial medicines added another layer because their labels appeared authoritative. Printed advertisements promised relief for coughing, pain, weakness, sleeplessness, stomach trouble, and sometimes an almost suspicious number of unrelated complaints. A medicine claiming to correct nearly everything often corrected the buyer's confidence more reliably than the disease. Some preparations contained substantial alcohol. Others included opiates, stimulants, laxatives, or combinations that buyers did not fully understand. A patient who became quiet could appear improved. Silence was not always a good sign. Purging and vomiting treatments belonged to an older effort to remove disease from the body. If illness was understood as excess, corruption, blockage, or internal imbalance, forcing the body to empty itself seemed reasonable. The result was visible. The patient vomited. The bowels moved. Sweat appeared. The treatment seemed to be drawing something harmful out. Yet a feverish patient already taking too little water could be pushed toward deeper dehydration. Someone who could barely eat might lose what little nourishment remained. The treatment followed an accepted logic and produced the opposite of the strength the patient needed. Bleeding came from a similar medical tradition. Its use changed across the century and was never universal, but removing blood from a weak patient could make recovery more difficult. Formal medicine and household practice shared these errors. Dangerous treatment was not simply the result of isolated families knowing too little. Physicians also inherited theories later challenged by observation and evidence. The frontier household therefore faced a strange problem. The most powerful-looking remedies often produced the clearest effects. The most useful care often looked like almost nothing. A cup, a spoon, a clean cloth, a patient held upright, a caregiver returning 10 minutes later to try again. In the cabin, the older daughter prepares a mild chest cloth. She remembers hearing that a stronger mustard preparation blistered another child, so she tests the warmth against her own skin and removes it early. That caution matters more than the plaster. The mother examines a commercial bottle and places it aside for the physician's judgment rather than giving another dose. That delay matters more than the label. The neighbour keeps offering fluid in small amounts. That persistence matters more than either remedy. By evening, the child remains ill but has taken enough liquid to become more alert. The patient complains about the taste of the broth. Everyone is relieved by the complaint. It is ordinary. Ordinary behaviour has become evidence of returning strength. The bottles remain on the table, still carrying their promises, but the cup stays closer to the bed. The family has not rejected medicine. It has begun to distinguish action from benefit. The neighbour enters carrying broth and clean cloth. She notices the child's breathing. But that is not the first problem she solves. She looks at the stove. The dry wood within reach will not last through the night. She looks at the mother. The caregiver is becoming a patient. She looks toward the barn. No one has fed the larger animals since morning. Then she looks at the basin and sees that the household has almost no clean cloth left. The medical crisis is visible in the patient. The household crisis is visible everywhere else. The visitor sets down the broth and sends a child back along the path with instructions. More wood is needed. Someone must tend the animals. The younger children should spend the night in another house if possible. A second adult must sit the first watch so the mother can sleep. None of these actions cures infection. Together, they prevent the family's support system from collapsing. This was one of the most important functions of frontier community. Neighbours transferred labour into a household that had lost it. A pot of food saved time, fuel, and standing effort. A stack of wood preserved warmth and kept an exhausted caregiver indoors. Taking healthy children elsewhere reduced noise and work, though it also carried the risk that exposure had already occurred. Feeding livestock protected milk, transport, food, and future income. Sitting beside the patient gave another person permission to sleep. Community assistance worked because ordinary tasks could be detached from one household and carried by another. The sick body remained in the cabin. The labour surrounding it spread across several homes. Relatives often formed the strongest network, but kinship was not the only route. Church relationships, nearby farms, immigrant communities, work partnerships, and simple familiarity could all bring help. The strength of the network depended on whether people had something left to give. During one isolated illness, neighbours might spare food and labour. During a wider outbreak, those reserves disappeared quickly. The woman known for nursing could have sick children of her own. The strongest horse might already be carrying someone else toward town. The household with extra grain might now be feeding 2 additional families. A community could absorb one crisis more easily than 10. As illness spread, the informal care system weakened at the same moment demand increased. The path between cabins carried aid. It also carried infection. A visitor entering the sick room might bring food and leave carrying disease home. The child moved elsewhere for protection might already be contagious. A shared sleigh, variable, cup, or gathering could connect families before anyone recognized the pattern. This made community care difficult. Staying away protected the healthy. Entering the cabin protected the sick. No choice removed risk. People relied on observation. If a house was known to contain fever or rash, visits might be reduced. Messages could be delivered at the door. Food might be left outside. Children could be kept away from gatherings. These measures varied and were far from complete, but practical caution did not require a modern vocabulary of microbes. People could see that illness followed contact. What they could not always see was when the danger began or ended. Community knowledge also helped judge severity. A visitor who had seen similar illnesses could compare the patient with earlier cases. Another pair of eyes might notice gradual decline that the household had accepted as normal. The neighbour watches the child drink. She asks how much was taken during the night. The answer is uncertain. She then asks when the child last passed water. No one remembers clearly. That absence of information becomes information. She insists that each attempt be noticed, not written on a modern chart, but remembered by assigning one person to the task at a time. One person manages fluids, one watches the fire, one handles livestock, one rests. Organisation reduces the chance that a necessary task disappears between exhausted people. The community also carries warnings. A visitor may report that a child in another home has developed a rash, that several families along the road are coughing, or that a school or religious gathering has emptied because parents are keeping children home. These reports help settlements understand scale. The sickness is no longer one family's private trouble. It is moving through the area. That knowledge can encourage caution. It can also create fear and exclusion. A sick household may be avoided after it most needs help. A family already considered foreign, poor, or socially suspect may be blamed more readily for disease. Community protection does not always operate fairly. Belonging influences who receives food, credit, transport, and attention. A respected household may have visitors, supplies, and people willing to take risks. A newcomer living near the edge of settlement may have only the road. The romantic frontier ideal celebrates independence. Winter sickness exposes its weakness. A completely independent family has no reserve beyond its own walls. Once several members become ill, independence becomes another word for isolation. The strongest household is often not the one that needs no one. It is the one connected to enough people that help can circulate before everyone becomes exhausted. By afternoon, the result is visible. Fresh wood stands near the stove. The animals have been fed. The younger children are eating in another cabin. The mother sleeps for the first uninterrupted hour she has had in several days. The neighbour sits beside the patient with the cup. The illness has not retreated dramatically. The household has become capable of meeting it again tomorrow. Outside, the storm has softened. Tracks connect the cabins in both directions. They carry meals, messages, warnings, clean cloth, and borrowed strength. The community cannot kill the infection. It can keep the family alive around it. The paths between the cabins carry more warnings by morning. Another child has developed a fever. A baby in a neighbouring household has stopped feeding normally. Farther along the road, parents have spent the night holding a child upright through repeated coughing fits. Children often reveal the true danger of winter sickness first. Adults could sometimes continue working through pain, fever, and exhaustion. They could describe what hurt, ask for water, change position, or recognise that their condition was worsening. Young children had fewer physical reserves and fewer ways to explain what was happening. An infant could not say that swallowing had become difficult. A toddler could not describe tightness in the chest. A feverish child might refuse water without understanding the danger. Caregivers had to interpret the body before the body failed. The smallest signs mattered. A baby who usually turned toward food now turned away. A child who had cried through the night became strangely quiet. The skin around the mouth looked pale or dark. Breathing pulled visibly between the ribs. A patient who had been restless could no longer remain fully awake. None of these signs provided a complete diagnosis. Together, they warned that ordinary household care might no longer be enough. In the cabin, the first child's fever has not broken cleanly. There were a few hours of improvement, enough to raise hope, but the cough has become sharp again. The younger child now lies nearby with flushed cheeks and a dry mouth. One sick child was a crisis. Several could overwhelm the home. The difficulty was not merely the number of patients, it was the speed at which children could worsen. Fever increased the need for water. Rapid breathing removed moisture. Vomiting or diarrhea could reduce it further. The sore throat made swallowing painful. A coughing child might push away the cup because drinking triggered another spasm. The result could be dangerous loss of fluid, though the household did not describe it through a modern clinical framework. It saw the outward signs. A dry tongue, less urine, a drawn face, cool hands and feet, weakness, irritability, or unusual sleepiness. A caregiver might offer water repeatedly and still underestimate how little had actually been swallowed. A spoonful seemed like something. Over many hours, it might not be enough. Patient nursing became especially valuable here. Small amounts could be offered often, rather than demanding a full cup at once. Broth, warm water, or another mild drink might be easier to take. A child could be held upright and allowed to pause between sips. The caregiver watched not only whether the cup was accepted, but whether the liquid stayed down. It was slow work. It could occupy an entire night. Respiratory illness carried another terror. A child with croup-like symptoms might wake with a barking cough and noisy breathing. The sound transformed the room immediately. Caregivers held the child upright, carried the patient closer to moist air, or opened the door briefly to the cold while keeping the child wrapped. Some improved as the swelling eased. Others faced more dangerous disease. A severe throat infection could begin with symptoms resembling an ordinary sore throat and then progress toward increasing weakness and obstruction of breathing. A parent might look into the child's throat by lamplight and see swelling or a pale coating, without knowing exactly what it meant. The child struggled to swallow. The voice changed. Breathing became laboured. At that point, the household's basin, blankets, broth, and careful watching were no longer a sufficient answer. But the doctor might still be miles away. This was the cruel edge of isolation. Families could recognise danger without possessing the means to stop it. Children were also especially vulnerable to the treatments adults selected. A strong medicine measured by guesswork could affect a small body very differently from an adult body. Alcohol, opiates, purges, irritating chest applications, and concentrated plant preparations carried greater risk when dose and contents were uncertain. Yet a silent child after medicine could appear improved. The crying had stopped. The coughing had weakened. The body seemed calm. That calm might be relief. It might also be dangerous sedation. The temptation to use something powerful increased when the child looked worse. This is understandable. A parent does not stand beside a struggling child and calmly celebrate restraint. Fear pushes toward action. The more helpless the household feels, the more attractive a dramatic remedy becomes. But the safest choice was sometimes the least impressive one. Do not give another dose too soon. Do not leave the plaster against the skin until it burns. Do not force food during a coughing fit. Keep the patient upright. Continue offering liquid. Send for help again. These decisions required patience. At the moment, fear made patience difficult. The emotional burden was as real as the physical work. A sick adult might understand the danger and cooperate. A frightened child might resist every useful action. The cup was pushed away. The blanket was kicked aside. Medicine was spat out. The patient cried when lifted and cried when placed down. The caregiver could become frustrated, then guilty for feeling frustrated. There was little quiet dignity in the work. It was wet, smoky, sleepless, repetitive, and filled with small failures. A spoon spilled. A clean cloth became dirty immediately. A child who had finally fallen asleep woke coughing. The fire weakened at the wrong moment. Still, older siblings watched from the edges of the room. They were told to remain quiet, bring water, hold the lamp, fetch cloth, or keep away from the bed. They understood enough to feel fear, but not enough to know what would happen. Sickness altered childhood even for those who remained well. Tasks increased. Meals changed. Attention shifted. If a brother or sister died, the absence became part of family memory long after winter ended. High childhood mortality did not make parents indifferent. Familiarity with death did not remove grief. Near midnight, the younger patient begins refusing the cup entirely. The older daughter tries again. The child turns away. She wets the lips with a cloth and offers a smaller amount. This time, A little is swallowed. Across the room, the first child wakes with another harsh coughing fit. The father lifts the patient against his shoulder while the neighbour adjusts folded blankets behind the back. For several minutes, everyone listens to the effort of breathing. Then the coughing eases. No one speaks immediately. The room settles around two fragile victories. One child has taken water, and another is breathing more evenly. They are not cures. They are enough to continue. Yet another frontier danger is already approaching the household, one that can begin before a child has taken a first breath. The mother's labour pains have started. The person sent for help leaves before dawn. But this time the patient is not a coughing child. The mother has gone into labour during the coldest part of the night. The family knew the birth was approaching. Cloth had been set aside. Water could be heated. A cradle or small sleeping place had been prepared. A neighbour with experience may have agreed to come when needed. Winter has changed every part of the plan. The road is buried. The experienced woman may live several miles away. The household already contains sick children. The mother has spent days nursing them, sleeping poorly, eating irregularly, and breathing the same smoky air. She enters labour tired before the hardest work begins. Childbirth was not a disease, but it could become a medical emergency with little warning. Most births did not end in the death of the mother. Many were managed successfully through experience, patience, practical skill, and household assistance. The margin of safety was still narrow. Severe bleeding, prolonged or obstructed labour, infection, convulsions, or a poorly positioned infant could transform an expected event into crisis. Modern surgical care, blood transfusion, antibiotics, dependable anaesthesia, and rapid emergency transport were not available in the forms now assumed. A family could prepare carefully and still face a problem no one in the room could solve. The messenger may travel by horse or sleigh, following the most familiar route rather than the shortest. Darkness makes landmarks uncertain. Wind fills old tracks. If the midwife or experienced neighbour is already attending another family, the messenger must decide whether to continue toward town, search for someone else, or return with no help. Inside the cabin, preparations begin with what is available. The mother is helped into a position she can tolerate. The fire is fed, water is warmed, cloth is placed within reach. Children are moved from the immediate space, though in a small dwelling they may still hear everything. The birth room is not separate from the rest of frontier life. A pot remains on the stove. Boots dry near the door. A sick child coughs from another bed. Someone checks the livestock and returns quickly. The family prepares for new life while managing the illness already present. Women who attended births came from many backgrounds. Some were recognised midwives with years of experience. Others were relatives or neighbours who had given birth themselves and assisted before. Their knowledge could include positioning, patience, massage, warmth, nourishment, observation, and recognition that labour was no longer progressing normally. Experience mattered. A person who had witnessed many births could recognise patterns that frightened relatives could not. She might know when to encourage movement, when to allow rest, when not to interfere, and when danger had become serious. Her skill was still constrained by distance, tools, and the limits of the period. She could not replace lost blood. She could not treat severe bacterial infection with antibiotics. She could not safely resolve every obstruction. Her presence improved the household's ability to respond. It did not remove the danger. Cleanliness was one area in which practice varied. Some attendants washed hands, used clean cloth, and boiled water because habit, experience, or emerging medical ideas encouraged them. Others worked where water, soap, fuel, and linen were limited. A person might move between cooking, tending animals, caring for sick children, and assisting with birth in the same space. The connection between contaminated hands and infection was not accepted consistently everywhere. Even formal medical practice changed unevenly. A physician could possess more training than anyone else in the room and still carry dangerous habits. A title did not guarantee clean hands. After birth, infection could begin quietly. The mother might appear exhausted but stable. A day or two later, fever developed, pain increased, weakness deepened rather than easing. At first, these symptoms could be confused with ordinary recovery, fatigue, or the illness already moving through the family. The mother was expected to be tired. She was expected to ache. She might already have chills from the room or fever from another infection. By the time everyone recognized that something was seriously wrong, the opportunity for meaningful intervention might be small. Severe bleeding created a more immediate danger. Families understood that some blood loss accompanied childbirth. The difficult question was how much was too much and what could be done when it continued. Experienced attendants used the methods available to them, but without transfusion, surgery, or modern medication, major hemorrhage could overpower the household quickly. The family might warm the mother, offer liquid, call urgently for a doctor, and watch her weaken despite everything. This was not a failure of devotion. It was a limit of the medical world. If the birth went well, the work continued. The newborn had to be kept warm, fed, watched, and protected from the infections already circulating in the house. A small infant lost heat quickly. The family wrapped the child and placed the cradle near a safe source of warmth, balancing protection from cold against smoke and excessive heat. Feeding brought more uncertainty. If the mother was weak, feverish, or unable to nurse effectively, another solution was needed. A relative or neighbour might assist. Animal milk or other substitutes could be used, but preparation and cleanliness were difficult. Feeding vessels were hard to keep sanitary. A newborn taking too little could weaken rapidly. Again, ordinary actions became medical decisions. Was the infant warm enough? Was the child feeding? Was the mother becoming stronger? Had bleeding truly slowed? Was the fever ordinary or dangerous? Someone had to keep answering these questions while the rest of the household still required food, fuel, and attention. The mother's illness also created a structural crisis. Her work connected nearly every routine in the home. She knew the stores, children, clothing, meals, remedies, and daily order. When she remained in bed, that knowledge had to be transferred quickly. The father might take over cooking while still cutting fuel and feeding animals. The older daughter might care for the newborn and younger children. A neighbour might remain for several days. Work that had appeared naturally attached to one person now revealed itself as a large and complicated system. The messenger finally returns with the midwife. She removes her wet outer layer, warms her hands, and asks only the questions she needs. The labour continues for hours. Near the stove, the older daughter holds a cup for her sick brother. The father carries water, then wood, then more water. The midwife watches the mother closely. By afternoon, the child is born. For a moment, the entire room waits for a sound. Then the newborn cries. The sound is thin but steady. Relief moves through the household, though no one mistakes it for certainty. The mother is exhausted. The other children remain sick. The fire is falling again. The animals have not been fed since morning. The family has gained a life. It has not gained another worker. For several days, it may lose the labour of the person who once held the household together. The father pulls on his coat, lifts the empty bucket, and steps into the snow. Even after birth, fever, and a night without sleep, the work outside has not stopped. The father closes the door and stands for a moment in the snow. His body wants rest. His hands are stiff from carrying water. His back aches from lifting wood, holding children, moving bedding, and helping through the long birth. He has slept only in fragments. A heaviness has begun behind his eyes, the kind that might be simple exhaustion or the first sign that the illness inside the cabin has reached him too. None of this changes the morning's work. The animals are waiting. A cow does not understand that a child has fever. Horses still need water. Chickens must be fed if the family expects eggs. Livestock shut inside too long can foul the air, overturn water, or weaken from neglect. A frozen trough must be opened. Hay must be carried. A damaged fence may need repair before animals wander into deep snow. Frontier survival depended on routines that could not be postponed because the household was sick. This was especially hard for people whose usual work took place beyond the walls, cutting fuel, tending livestock, repairing tools, clearing paths, and travelling for help exposed them to cold at the moment their bodies were most exhausted. The person could not recover while chopping wood for hours. Without the wood, no one inside could remain warm. The father reaches the barn and lifts the latch. Animal breath gathers in the darker air. The smell of hay, manure, leather, and damp hide is strong after the cold outside. One horse turns toward him, expecting feed. He works more slowly than usual. That slowness has consequences. A healthy person might complete feeding, watering, and cleaning before breakfast. Someone weakened by fever or sleep loss takes longer and pauses between tasks. Every additional minute outside increases exposure. Every unfinished job returns later. The household begins to accumulate debt, measured not only in money, but in labour. Wood remains unsplit. Clothing remains unwashed. A broken harness remains unrepaired. Ash gathers beneath the stove. The path to the water source narrows beneath drifting snow. Each delayed task makes the following day harder. This is why sickness could become a household emergency even when no individual appeared close to death. A family survived through the constant production of necessities. Heat, water, food, shelter, and animal care had to be created again every day. When several people became ill, production fell while need increased. The sick required more fuel because they remained indoors. They needed more water for drinking, cleaning, and food. They dirtied more cloth. They consumed the time of those who might otherwise perform other work. At the same time, they contributed less labour. The household was squeezed from both sides. The father fills a manger, then stops to cough. It is only once. He looks toward the barn door, as though someone might have heard. No one has, he continues. Adults often concealed early symptoms because admitting sickness shifted too much work onto others. A man insisted he could still tend animals. A mother continued cooking while feverish. Older children claimed not to be tired because they could see how little strength remained. This concealment was understandable. It could deepen exhaustion and spread disease. A person who worked through the first stage of illness might collapse later after using the reserves that rest could have preserved. A mild infection could become more dangerous when combined with cold exposure, poor nourishment, and physical labour. Rest was not available in equal amounts. A better supplied household might hire help, rely on adult relatives, use larger stores, or reduce work because animals and buildings were well prepared. A poorer family, with one horse, limited fuel, and few neighbours, possessed less room for error. The difference between survival and failure could be one healthy worker. Consider the woodpile. A family that cut and stacked enough dry fuel during autumn entered sickness with time stored in physical form. Every split log represented work completed before the crisis. It allowed someone to remain inside rather than searching for fuel during a storm. An inadequate woodpile represented a different future. The easiest branches near the house may already have been collected. Snow concealed fallen wood. Standing timber had to be cut, moved, split, and dried enough to burn. A weak worker could injure himself. An axe used with numb hands was unforgiving. A slipping boot, falling branch, or moment of dizziness could turn fever into trauma. The failure of one task created another patient. Livestock work carried similar risks. A frightened horse could kick. A cow could knock down someone moving too slowly. Ice near a trough made footing uncertain. An adult who fainted in the barn might not be found quickly because everyone inside assumed he was still working. Ordinary labour became more dangerous when performed by someone ill. Leaving it undone was dangerous too. If animals weakened or died, the loss reached beyond the mourning. A milk cow provided food. Horses provided transport and pulling power. Chickens provided eggs. Livestock could be traded, sold, or slaughtered. Their survival supported the household's future. Feeding them was medical work in the wider sense. It preserved the food and transport systems on which human recovery depended. Inside, the older daughter faces a similar calculation. She has been told to rest after the night watch, but the newborn needs attention. 2 children remain feverish, and her mother is too weak to stand for long. The girl warms broth. She does not prepare it exactly as her mother would. It becomes too thick, so she adds water. The fire drops while she tends the pot. One child begins coughing. The newborn wakes. She tries to solve all 4 problems at once. A spoon is left near the edge of the table. A cloth falls onto the floor. The broth begins to catch against the pot. None of these failures is serious alone. Together, they show what happens when skilled household labour is replaced by an exhausted beginner. Work is not merely effort. It is timing, sequence, memory, and judgment. The person who knows when to feed the stove before lifting the baby prevents the room from cooling. The person who prepares cloth before offering broth avoids leaving the patient alone. Experience reduces wasted motion. Illness removes experience from the system. When the father returns, he finds the daughter standing beside the stove with tears in her eyes. She believes she has ruined the food. He scrapes away the burned layer and tastes what remains. It is smoky, but usable. The household eats it. A meal that would be rejected under easier conditions still contains water, warmth, grain, and labour. The important question is whether it can be swallowed and whether enough remains for everyone. The father carries a bowl to his wife. She takes a few spoonfuls. He finishes the rest because he will need the strength. Then he sits down for what he intends to be 1 minute. He wakes when the bowl slips from his hand. The sound startles the room. For a moment, no one moves. The father looks confused, then embarrassed. He says he merely fell asleep. The older daughter touches his forehead and finds it warm. Now the household has lost another worker. This is the turning point families feared. Not the first cough, but the moment when the number of people requiring care exceeds the number able to provide it. Work is reduced to essentials. Feed the fire, carry water, keep the animals alive, give the sick something to drink, protect the newborn. Everything else can wait. By afternoon, the father lies beneath a blanket on a bench. The daughter carries feed to the nearest animals while a neighbour handles the heavier work. Her boots are too large and packed with cloth at the toes. She walks carefully, repeating her instructions. Inside, the sick continue breathing. Outside, the animals continue eating. The fire continues because several people have accepted work that once belonged to one. For now, the essentials are being maintained. The bucket is half full. The animals have been fed. The broth is poor, but warm. And somewhere beyond the buried road, the physician may finally be approaching, bringing training, instruments, medicine, and no guarantee that any of them will be enough. The physician reaches the cabin near sunset. His horse is white with blown snow along its chest and legs. Ice has formed at the edges of the bridle. The doctor looks less like a rescuer from a grand story than another exhausted man who has been travelling through dangerous weather. He carries a leather bag. Everyone notices it. The bag represents knowledge from outside the household. It may hold bottles, powders, bandages, simple instruments, and perhaps a thermometer or stethoscope, depending on the date, location, and practitioner. Its contents differ from one physician to another. What the family sees is possibility. What the bag does not contain is a reliable cure for most of the infections already moving through the room. The doctor removes his coat, warms his hands, and begins asking questions. He wants to know who became sick first, when each fever began, whether anyone developed a rash, what remedies were given, and how much the patients have eaten or drunk. This last question surprises no one now. The family has spent several days learning how much survival can depend on a cup. He examines the first child, he watches the chest rise and fall, listens to the cough, and places an ear or instrument against the body. He looks into the throat using the available light. He feels the pulse and skin. He asks the child to speak, breathe, or swallow. The room becomes quiet. A physician's examination could provide something the household badly needed: another judgment. He had seen illness outside this family. He might recognize a pattern the parents had never encountered. He could compare this patient with many others. He might understand that a mild-looking symptom belonged to a dangerous disease, or that a frightening cough was likely to pass with support. Experience gave him an advantage. It did not give certainty. 19th-century frontier physicians worked during a period of major medical change. Training was inconsistent. Some studied in established schools, read current medical publications, and completed substantial apprenticeships. Others received far less preparation. Licensing and professional standards varied by place and period. Different practitioners followed competing systems of explanation and treatment. One favored strong drugs, bleeding, or purging. Another used milder treatment and observation. A botanical practitioner relied heavily on plant preparations. A surgeon with useful practical skill might still misunderstand infection. The word doctor described a wide range of competence. It also described a person working without many of the tools that would later make diagnosis and treatment more reliable. There was no chest X-ray to reveal the lungs, no laboratory culture to identify bacteria, no pulse oximeter to show oxygen in the blood. Even when the doctor correctly suspected pneumonia, diphtheria, influenza, or another serious infection, he often lacked a medicine capable of removing the cause. The diagnosis could improve, the options might not. This did not make the visit useless. A careful physician could discourage a dangerous remedy, recommend fluids and rest, identify the patient requiring closest attention, treat pain, clean a wound, set a fracture, assist during childbirth, or recognize that one household's illness threatened the surrounding settlement. He could bring calm, not false reassurance, but a more practiced way of looking at the room. The family has been reacting to every cough as a separate emergency. The doctor sorts the patients by urgency. The newborn is cold but feeding. The mother is weak and feverish, and her condition after childbirth must be watched. The father appears to have the same respiratory illness spreading through the home. The younger child is uncomfortable but stable. The first child concerns him most. The breathing is too difficult. Too little fluid has been taken. The doctor does not promise recovery. That refusal is frightening. It is also honest. He asks what has already been given. Broth? A little camphor. A chest rubbing. A mild mustard preparation. Something from a commercial bottle, but only one dose. The bottle is handed to him. He reads the label, smells the contents, and tells the family not to give more for now. Perhaps he recognizes alcohol, an opiate, or another sedating ingredient. Perhaps he simply sees that the child is already too weak to risk further suppression. The dramatic medicine returns to the shelf. Water returns to the bedside. This may be the most valuable decision he makes. Physicians could make harmful decisions too. Formal medicine preserved treatments whose theories were stronger than their results. Bleeding had declined from its earlier height but had not disappeared everywhere. Strong purgatives remained common. Medicines containing opium, alcohol, mercury compounds, antimony, or other powerful substances could produce obvious effects and serious side effects. The doctor might believe intervention displayed skill, The family might expect him to do something impressive after travelling so far. A mild recommendation could seem disappointing. They had not sent a rider through snow merely to be told to offer water and wait. This created pressure on the doctor as well as the patient. A powder could be measured. A bottle could be left behind. Instructions could be followed. Even when the medicine had uncertain value, it made the visit look active. Good judgment sometimes meant resisting that pressure. The most careful practitioners learned through experience that aggressive treatment could weaken someone already fighting disease. They observed that some patients recovered when supported rather than repeatedly purged, bled, or drugged. Medical practice changed because people compared outcomes, disputed theories, and watched what happened. Change travelled unevenly. An idea accepted in an urban hospital might take years to influence a remote district. A rural doctor could own recent books and still lack the equipment or assistance to apply what he had learned. Another practitioner might reject the new idea entirely. Distance separated frontier households not only from physicians, but from the faster movement of medical knowledge. Cost remained another barrier. A visit consumed travel, time, and risk. Payment might be made in money, goods, labour, or credit. A poor family could hesitate because the bill threatens seed, food, animals, or supplies needed later. Calling the doctor was an economic decision as well as a medical one. Waiting saved resources if the illness passed. Waiting could become fatal if it did not. Families made the choice without knowing the result. In the cabin, the doctor leaves instructions that sound almost too ordinary. Keep the child upright when breathing becomes difficult. Offer small amounts of liquid frequently. Do not force heavy food. Keep the room warm, but clear smoke when possible. Do not repeat the strong commercial medicine. Watch for increasing difficulty swallowing, a change of colour around the mouth, greater confusion, or inability to wake the patient fully. He prepares something for discomfort and explains the dose carefully. Then he turns to the mother. Her fever after childbirth worries him. He asks about bleeding, pain, chills, and when the symptoms began. He cannot confirm the cause, and he cannot offer antibiotics. He can insist on rest, fluids, warmth, cleanliness, and observation. Once again, medical knowledge reaches the edge of what medicine can do. The doctor remains for several hours because the weather has worsened and because he wants to see whether the first child becomes more stable. Without his coat and bag, he looks less like an institution and more like another tired person in a crowded room. He has probably visited households where recovery followed, and the family credited him with saving a life. He has also left cabins knowing nothing in his bag was likely to be enough. Before midnight, the child drinks several spoonfuls and keeps them down. The breathing remains difficult but no worse. The mother's fever does not rise further. The father sleeps heavily on the bench. These are modest signs. The family receives them as mercy. The doctor cannot stay indefinitely. Other patients may be waiting. He repeats the warning signs, closes his bag, and prepares to leave after daylight. His arrival has brought useful judgment, a little medicine, and clearer instructions. It has not brought certainty. As the household settles into another watch, the leather bag rests beside the door, smaller now than it appeared when the physician entered. Near the bed, the neighbour folds her hands. The older daughter lowers her head. The father, half awake beneath his blanket, begins whispering words everyone in the room recognises. When medicine reached its limit, frontier families did not always fall into silence. Often, they began to pray. The prayer begins when there is nothing new to do. The fire is steady. The child has taken water. The physician has examined the family and left instructions. The medicines have been reduced to those judged least likely to cause harm. Everyone must now wait. Waiting sounds passive until it lasts through an entire night. A caregiver watches breathing without knowing whether the next hour will bring improvement. A parent listens to a child cough and has no new treatment to offer. Exhaustion makes every sound larger and every silence more frightening. Familiar prayer gives fear a sequence. One line, a pause, another line. Words remembered from childhood require less effort than new ones. They can be repeated in darkness while hands continue ordinary work. The neighbour lifts the cup. The older daughter adjusts the blanket. The father whispers a passage he knows by memory. Faith does not replace the tasks. It accompanies them. For many frontier households, religious life provided both emotional language and practical organisation. Beliefs varied widely across denominations, communities, cultures, and families. Not every home prayed in the same manner, and some relied little on formal religion. Where congregational networks were strong, however, illness could activate a system of aid. A minister, elder, or well-connected neighbour might know which family had spare food, who owned a reliable horse, which woman had experience with childbirth, and who could take children for a night. The prayer meeting and the woodpile were not separate institutions. The first could mobilise the second. In the cabin, word of the illness reaches several households through the neighbour who arrived earlier. One family sends food, another offers to tend livestock the following morning. A woman from the congregation agrees to take the second night watch if the sickness continues. The help may be described as duty, fellowship, charity, kinship, or simple decency. Its material effects are the same. The patient receives care from adults who are less exhausted. The household preserves fuel. Children are fed. The mother is allowed to recover. Religious language also structured grief when recovery did not come. If a patient died during winter, the family faced immediate physical work. The body had to be washed and dressed. Relatives needed to be informed. Frozen ground could delay burial or make digging difficult. Children still required food. Animals still needed care. Ritual divided an overwhelming period into actions. Someone prepared the body. Someone read familiar words. Someone organised food. Someone stood with the family. A burial service did not erase loss. It prevented loss from becoming entirely solitary. Faith could comfort, but it could also be used badly. A family might interpret illness as punishment and add guilt to fear. Someone might claim that prayer made practical treatment unnecessary. Confident spiritual explanations could delay a physician or discourage useful care. Medicine contained the same danger in another form, certainty exceeding evidence. At its best, belief did not demand that the family stop acting. It gave meaning to action that could not guarantee an outcome. Carry water, even when the patient may not recover. Sit the night watch when no one knows what morning will bring. Feed the neighbour's animals because suffering has already removed enough from the household. Take in the children because grief should not also leave them without shelter. These actions turned belief into labour. They also revealed social boundaries. A family deeply connected to a congregation might receive help quickly. A newcomer, outsider, or person excluded because of race, language, class, or reputation might remain beyond the network. Mercy was preached broadly. It was distributed through human relationships, which were rarely equal. The father continues the prayer until his voice becomes too weak. The older daughter takes over. She does not perform the words dramatically. She speaks because everyone knows what comes next. The rhythm steadies the room. Then the child asks for water. The request interrupts the prayer. No one minds. The neighbour lifts the cup immediately. The child drinks, stops, and drinks again. The father closes his eyes, not because the danger has ended, but because another adult is awake and watching. This is how emotional support becomes physical support. Calm allows people to conserve strength. Shared ritual gives them a way to remain present without inventing false reassurance. A community promise becomes a person sitting in a chair at 2 a.m. The physician's instructions remain in force. The fever is still watched. The mother's condition is still uncertain. No one claims prayer has cured anyone. Its value lies elsewhere. It keeps fear from isolating each person inside the same room. It reminds the exhausted that responsibility is being shared. It gives the household language for hope that does not require a guarantee. Before dawn, another neighbour arrives quietly. He leaves a bundle of wood outside rather than entering the sick room. The gesture contains its own caution. Help is offered without unnecessary contact. Inside, the older daughter notices the new pile through the window. She understands what it means. The family will have heat for another day. The child beside her is still breathing steadily. The mother is sleeping. The night watch continues. Belief has not removed the fever. It has helped organize people around those who can no longer carry the night alone. By daylight, survival can be measured through objects that do not look medical. A second quilt, a dry wood pile, a full water barrel, a sound horse, a separate room, credit with the local doctor, relatives living nearby. Each item gives a household another option. Options are what poverty removes first. Two families can face the same disease with equal courage and unequal protection. One has food, fuel, space, transport, and established relationships. The other begins the illness with a nearly empty pantry, damp wood, crowded bedding, and no one close enough to help. The biological threat may be similar. The chain surrounding it is not. A better supplied household can allow the patient to rest without immediately losing heat or food production. Another adult may be available for essential work. Spare cloth can be used before the first set is washed and dried. A physician can be called earlier because payment, though painful, will not consume the family's last resource. A poorer household delays, not because its members value life less, because every decision threatens something else necessary for life. Money spent on a medical visit may have been intended for seed, tools, food, or debt. A horse taken through bad weather may be the only transport. Food offered to a patient may reduce what remains for children and workers. Scarcity turns care into trade-offs. Housing expresses inequality physically. A larger home does not prevent infection, but it may allow separation and better ventilation. A sound roof and dry floor protect bedding. A reliable stove converts fuel efficiently. A temporary shelter, crowded cabin, or poorly finished structure exposes the family to drafts, dampness, smoke, and limited storage. These conditions may reflect recent arrival, debt, poor land access, scarce materials, or exclusion rather than carelessness. The building carries the household's social position into the sick room. Geography creates another form of inequality. Families near towns have better access to physicians, shops, information, churches, mail, and other households. Remote families pay for distance in time, risk, and lost labour. A map may show 20 miles. It does not show whether the road crosses a frozen creek, whether snow hides the route, or whether the only healthy adult must remain home. Social connection matters as much as physical distance. An established family may call on relatives, neighbours, a congregation, or trading partners. A newly arrived household can live within sight of others and still lack the trust required to ask for help. Belonging influences who receives credit, food, childcare, transport, and attention. Exclusion influences who waits. Race, ethnicity, language, religion, and legal status shaped access in ways the simple frontier survival story often hides. Indigenous communities endured disease within conditions transformed by colonization, forced movement, violence, loss of land, and attacks on food systems and institutions. Their medical traditions belong to distinct cultures and should not be reduced to a convenient collection of plants for settlers. African American families, Mexican communities, Chinese immigrants, and other marginalized groups face different combinations of discriminatory law, economic restriction, violence, and exclusion, depending on time and place. A physician willing to travel to one household might refuse another. A merchant could extend credit according to reputation, prejudice, or standing. A church might organize generous support inside its own circle while leaving outsiders beyond it. Medical access followed power more often than stories of equal hardship admit. The surviving record is unequal too. Property-owning and literate families were more likely to leave letters, diaries, account books, and preserved documents. Poor households, migrants, hired workers, marginalized communities, and people living in temporary camps often appear only in records created by officials, employers, physicians, or institutions. This affects what can be reconstructed. The best documented household was not necessarily the most typical. The people most exposed to hardship were often least able to leave a detailed account. A miner or hired labourer faced a different medical system from a settled family. Illness could stop wages immediately. Nursing might come from fellow workers, a boarding house keeper, or no one. Food and lodging could depend on employment that sickness made impossible. Recovery could return the patient to unemployment. A widowed parent with small children faced another pattern. One adult's illness removed nearly the entire structure of work. An aging couple without nearby children had little reserve. A large family contained more possible caregivers, but also more people through whom infection could move. Household size was not automatically an advantage. Its value depended on age, health, skill, and who became sick first. Women's labour revealed inequality within homes as well. The person performing the most nursing often slept least and ate last. Her work was treated as an expandable resource until she became ill. A mother could pass through fever without being counted as a patient because she never stopped working long enough to occupy the bed. Children experienced unequal care according to age, dependency, household structure, and available adults. A nursing infant depended heavily on the mother's health. An older child might receive less attention because younger children seemed more vulnerable. Orphans, apprentices, stepchildren, and hired children did not always occupy the same protected position as others. Affection existed. It operated inside limited time and material supply. This is why the myth of frontier toughness distorts the past. It treats survival as a test of character. Those who lived appear strong. Those who died disappear into an implied failure. Disease did not distribute outcomes according to courage. A child did not die because the family lacked determination. A mother did not develop infection because she endured incorrectly. A labourer did not worsen because he deserved less care. People met biological danger with unequal resources and unequal social protection. Luck remained even after every difference was counted. A wealthy family could lose a child to diphtheria. A poor household could survive influenza with rest, fluids, and fortunate timing. Luck did not erase the larger pattern. Food, warmth, space, transport, knowledge, credit, and community support increased the number of chances a patient received. In the cabin, another pot of food arrives. The family accepts it without the hesitation it showed earlier. Pride has become less useful than nourishment. The child near the window asks whether the storm has ended. Sunlight lies across the snow. Tracks connect the house to several others. They show why the family is still functioning. Someone carried food. Someone brought wood. Someone travelled for the physician. Someone watched through the night. Beyond the visible tracks, another household may have faced the same sickness without a single person approaching its door. Both may later be described as frontier families enduring winter. Only one had enough people to help carry the cost. When the first child finally stands beside the bed, everyone watches as though the floor itself might move. The fever has eased. Breathing is quieter. Appetite has returned in small, uncertain portions. Yet recovery does not look like the cheerful ending people often imagine. The child's legs tremble. A few steps across the cabin require one hand against the wall. The face is thinner. The clothes hang differently. After less than a minute, the child asks to sit down. The family has survived the worst of the sickness. It has not escaped the cost. Illness rarely ended at the exact moment fever broke. Recovery could last days, weeks, or much longer. A person who spent severe illness in bed might remain weak after immediate danger passed. Coughing could continue. Appetite returned slowly. Muscles lost strength. Ordinary work felt heavier. For children, the delay could be especially visible. A child who normally ran outside now remained near the stove. The short walk to the barn caused exhaustion. Lessons, chores, and play resumed gradually, if they resumed fully at all. Some diseases left lasting injury. Hearing could be damaged. Breathing could remain difficult. Repeated coughing could weaken the body for months. Survival did not always restore the person who had existed before the illness. The same was true for adults. The father can sit upright now, but splitting wood remains beyond him. He tries once, lifting the axe and bringing it down without his usual control. The blow lands badly. The neighbour quietly takes the tool, before pride turns weakness into injury. The father objects. The neighbour ignores him. This is not an argument about character. It is recognition that one recovering body cannot yet support the work it carried before. For several more days, other people must feed animals, haul water, and bring fuel. Every borrowed hour creates a debt of some kind. Not always a written debt. A neighbour may refuse money. A relative may insist that help is simply what families do. But obligations accumulate through memory. The household receiving assistance this winter may be expected to provide it during harvest, childbirth, fire, accident, or illness in another year. Mutual aid strengthened communities because help moved in both directions over time. It also placed pressure on families with little to return. A household weakened by sickness could owe labour at the same moment it lacked strength for its own work. The physician's bill added a more direct cost. He travelled through dangerous weather, spent hours in the cabin, examined several people, and left medicine. Payment might be expected in cash, goods, labour, or credit. Whatever the form, it drew from resources needed elsewhere. Money set aside for seed might be used. An animal might eventually be sold. A debt could remain open until the next harvest. A family delaying the doctor had not necessarily failed to value life. It may have understood that one visit could threaten the material foundation of the following season. The cruel part was that payment did not guarantee cure. A family could lose money and still lose the patient. It could avoid calling the doctor, lose the patient, and carry the question afterward. Would earlier help have changed anything? Often, no one could answer. That uncertainty survived longer than the sickness. Lost labour created another debt. During the weeks of illness, fences were not fully repaired. Tools remained where they had been left. Laundry accumulated. Food stores were used more quickly because caregivers and helpers also needed feeding. Some animals lost condition. Work planned for clear winter days had not been completed. When the family recovered, the season did not provide extra time as compensation. Spring approached according to its own schedule. Fields still had to be prepared. Buildings required repair. Equipment had to be made ready. The weakened household entered the next season already behind. This could alter an entire year. A family might plant less because too few workers had regained strength. Delayed planting reduced the harvest. A smaller harvest reduced the following winter's reserve. The fever ended. Its causality continued. For hired workers, miners, craftspeople, and others dependent on wages, the effect could be immediate. Days in bed meant days without income. A worker might lose a position because someone else had been hired. Lodging or meals connected to employment could disappear when the person became least able to search for alternatives. The body recovered into poverty. A widowed household faced a deeper rupture. If an adult died, the family lost not only a loved person but a collection of skills, relationships, and routines. The missing work had to be redistributed permanently. A father's death could remove income, heavy labour, transport, or legal standing within systems favouring men. A mother's death could remove nursing, cooking, food preservation, clothing production, childcare, household memory, and the daily coordination holding everything together. No replacement reproduced all of it. Relatives might take in children. An older daughter might assume adult responsibilities years before she was ready. A surviving parent might remarry partly because the household required another adult. Children could be divided among different homes when no one family could support them all. The illness of one person could rearrange an entire kinship network. Orphaning was not an abstract statistic. It was a child leaving a familiar bed, clothing packed into a small bundle, siblings discovering they would not all travel to the same place. Community institutions, churches, relatives and neighbours sometimes prevented complete abandonment. Yet help often came with loss. A child might survive physically while losing home, routine, and proximity to brothers or sisters. Frontier endurance contained many hidden endings. A family could appear in a later census and be counted among the living. The record might not show who had died, who had been sent away, who had lost hearing after fever, who never regained full strength, or who carried fear into every winter that followed. Memory preserved what official records reduced. A certain cough became recognizable. A particular bottle was never trusted again. A quilt used during the illness remained connected to the child who had lain beneath it. A parent remembered the sound of someone breathing through one long night even decades later. Families also converted memory into preparation. More wood might be stored before the next winter. Extra cloth could be set aside. A better route to a neighbour's house might be marked. A household might discard one remedy, keep another, or send for help earlier. Experience became preventive knowledge, though never perfect knowledge. Communities carried these memories too. An outbreak could change attitudes toward gatherings, cleanliness, ventilation, nursing, or the speed with which a physician was called. New ideas entered frontier life not only through books and institutions, but because people compared winters. They remembered who worsened after a harsh treatment. They noticed when illness moved from one gathering to several homes. Not every lesson was interpreted correctly, but consequence made the past difficult to ignore. In the cabin, the mother is finally able to stand for part of the morning. She moves toward the stove, then stops when the older daughter places a hand on the pot first. For weeks, the daughter has learned the household through necessity. She knows where grain is stored. She knows how much fuel the stove consumes. She knows which child still needs to be reminded to drink. The mother watches and understands that sickness has changed more than the family's strength. It has changed their roles. The father remains on the bench, repairing a small piece of harness instead of working outside. His hands can manage lever, even if his body cannot yet manage the barn. The first child sits beside the window beneath the same quilts that covered the sick bed. Outside, snow has begun to sink around the fence posts. Water drips from the roof where sunlight reaches it. The household is not restored. It is reorganizing again. The doctor's bill remains unpaid. The pantry is lower. Several tasks have been lost to the season. Everyone tires earlier. Yet the fire is steady. The animals are alive. The newborn is feeding, and the children have begun to argue softly over a wooden object near the hearth. That small argument brings more relief than silence ever did. The family survived by spending fuel, money, sleep, strength, relationships, and time. Some of those resources can be replaced. Some cannot. As evening settles, the older daughter folds the sick bed cloth and places it away. She keeps the basin near the stove a little longer. No one is ready to declare danger completely gone, but the room no longer waits for the next breath in fear. It waits for strength to return. So how did frontier families survive winter sickness without modern medicine? They survived, when they did, by doing many small things well enough and long enough. They kept the room warm, They carried water. They offered broth 1 spoonful at a time. They lifted a coughing child upright. They changed wet cloth when clean cloth remained. They watched breathing, appetite, fever, alertness, and weakness. They borrowed labour. They asked neighbours to feed animals, cut wood, prepare food, carry messages, or sit beside a bed. They called a physician when one could be reached, and when the family could bear the distance and cost. They used remedies, some helpful, some comforting, some useless, and some dangerous. Most of all, they surrounded the sick body with care and waited to see whether it could recover. There was no forgotten frontier cure. No herb, bottle, plaster, prayer, or act of toughness reliably defeated pneumonia, influenza, diphtheria, tuberculosis, severe infection, or the complications of childbirth. Families improved the odds. They could not control the outcome. That distinction matters because old survival stories often make recovery sound cleaner than it was. Someone became sick, received a traditional remedy, endured bravely, and returned to work. Real recovery was usually slower. It required food, fuel, sleep, labour, knowledge, and time. It depended on whether the patient could keep drinking, whether the household had enough wood, whether another worker remained healthy, whether a neighbour came through the snow, and whether the illness was one the body could overcome. Survival was not proof that every treatment worked. Death was not proof that the family failed. The household is quieter now. The worst coughing is eased. The mother can move around the cabin again, though she sits more often than before. The father performs smaller tasks near the stove while strength returns. The older daughter no longer watches every breath, but she still notices when the first child leaves the cup untouched. She reminds him to drink. He objects because he feels better. That resistance is welcome. The newborn sleeps near the mother, carefully wrapped but no longer surrounded by the fearful silence of the first night. The younger children have begun moving through the room with their ordinary lack of caution. Someone must tell them not to disturb the basin, pull at the quilt, or scatter wood shavings across the floor, otherwise they will damage what remains. The house sounds alive again. Outside, winter has not ended. Snow remains beyond the door. The road is difficult in places. The wood pile is lower than it should be. Food was used faster than planned. But the household is no longer organised entirely around illness. The sick bed becomes a bed again. The chair beside it is moved closer to the table. The medicine bottle remains on the shelf, where it looks less powerful than it once did. The cup is washed and returned to ordinary use. These changes happen without ceremony. No one stands in the centre of the room and declares that the family has survived. People simply begin doing familiar things for familiar reasons. A pot is prepared because everyone is hungry. A boot is repaired because it is worn. A child is told to bring in kindling. The father checks the harness. The mother folds cloth used during the illness and decides which pieces can still be kept. The older daughter sits for several minutes without holding a cup, tending a fire, or listening for a cough. She has learned how heavy care can be. She has also learned that much of it is nearly invisible. History often remembers the physician arriving through snow, the dramatic remedy, the severe storm, or the person who recovered after everyone expected the worst. It is less likely to preserve the repeated actions between those moments. The water offered and refused. The second attempt. The third. The wood carried indoors before dawn. The neighbour who stayed while another person slept. The child who took over a task without being ready. The caregiver who kept watching after everyone else closed their eyes. Those actions formed the true structure of frontier medicine. Not cure, but support. Not certainty, but observation. Not independence, but dependence carefully shared. Among people with limited resources and no better choice. The system could be strong. It could also fail. If food ran out, fuel became wet, too many people became sick, or disease moved faster than care could respond, the family could lose someone despite every effort. That possibility never disappeared completely. It remained inside each winter. Families knew it through graves, empty places at tables, and the names of children spoken years after their brief lives had ended. Fear did not prevent daily work. It made preparation more meaningful. Wood was stacked because another storm would come. Food was stored because sickness might return. Remedies were remembered, questioned, and changed. Routes to neighbours were learned. Children were taught to carry water, tend a fire, and watch someone weaker than themselves. Every household built its answer before the next illness arrived. The answer was never perfect. It was made from whatever the family possessed. That is the deeper truth behind survival on the frontier. People did not overcome winter sickness through strength alone. They survived through systems: a functioning stove, a stocked pantry, a healthy horse, a knowledgeable caregiver, a reliable neighbour, an experienced midwife, an available physician, and enough shared labour to prevent the rest of life from collapsing around the patient. Every part mattered. The weakest link often determined what happened next. For families with wealth, space, food, and social support, the system had more room to bend. For poor, isolated, excluded, or newly arrived households, it could break much sooner. Luck stood beside all of them. A mild illness could pass despite poor treatment. A dangerous illness could kill despite excellent nursing. A child could recover after a remedy that did nothing. A mother could weaken from an infection no one in the room had the power to cure. Frontier families lived with these uncertainties because there was nowhere else to live. They still fed the fire. They still lifted the cup. They still crossed the snow when someone called for help. Evening settles over the cabin once more. The quilt from the sickbed now rests across the child's knees near the hearth. The fabric is worn where hands held it during the fever. Beside the stove, the basin has been emptied and turned upside down to dry. The older daughter places one final piece of wood onto the fire. It catches slowly. A small flame moves along the edge, then settles into a steady glow. No one is watching the bed now. The child is awake, listening to the ordinary conversation of the household. The mother is mending cloth. The father works leather between his hands. The newborn shifts once and becomes still again. Nothing has returned exactly to the way it was, but the room is warm. The water bucket is filled. The people inside are tired, changed, and still together. Before modern medicine, that was not a cure. Sometimes it was survival.